Hello, I'm Ken Samples. I'm one of the senior scholars here at Reasons to Believe. And I've seen a very fine film that I want to describe for you. And then we'll get an opportunity to actually talk with the producer of this film. The new film is entitled After Death, and I describe it this way: an engaging introduction to the extraordinary phenomenon of near death experiences, NDEs. The documentary explores some of the medical and scientific evidence, the common types of encounters people have experienced beyond death, and how those experiences impacted them and their lives afterwards. I have the real pleasure of being joined by Jason Pamer. He is the co-author and executive producer of Cypher Studios, and he's one of the producers of this fine new film. Jason, it's a pleasure to talk with you. How are you doing?
Privileged to be with you. Thank you so much. I say this that it's one thing to make something; it's a whole another thing to distribute and release. And without platforms like yours and voices like yours, we would not be able to reach an audience. So grateful for the time.
Well, thank you. Let me ask you a few questions about this film. When I was a college professor, I taught a course for about 5 years entitled Perspectives on Death and Dying. College students never think they're going to die, but we would talk about near-death experiences. So what got you and your colleagues interested in this fascinating field of NDEs, or near-death experiences?
It was the director who encountered significant loss. His brother-in-law was tragically killed in a car accident, and he had grown up with a faith. But like all of us, when we're confronted with death, grief, loss of that magnitude, that faith is put to the test. And he then went on a journey of discovery and read 30 books or so on various NDE accounts and the researchers that have delved into that area of study. And it was on the other side of those 30 books that he felt like his faith was congruent with the science that was out there around the science of death and what is medically knowable about this line of death and what's happening in the brain. And so that gave him a confidence. And then his search kind of went into the film space, and there was no film out there that really covered the material on the surface area that the books did. So then his goal was to go make something. So for the next person that encounters loss, they can watch this film and have a sense of hope that faith and science are congruent. They're actually not in conflict. And that what we know about death and that thin line can actually give us more excitement that there is life after death.
That's great. At Reasons to Believe, of course, that is our central argument, that faith and science are indeed compatible. I really appreciated that you brought in some real careful researchers. Raymond Moody, I remember his book was kind of the first one on the topic in the mid-1970s. Michael Sabom is a very careful thinker and cardiologist, and Kenneth Ring is a big name as well. So you've got all of the right people, I think, involved. Let me ask you this question. What kind of impact do you hope that the movie will have on people who come out to watch it?
Many people who come and watch will not have had their own NDE, but I think they can get a glimpse of the eternity that's waiting for us. And in light of that eternity, the question should be asked, how now shall we then live? And Mary Neal, who's an orthopedic surgeon in the film, went off a waterfall and got trapped under the water for about 25 minutes. And in her life review, which in my mind is this grace bubble given to people, this perspective that the eternal gives to us at that place. And she saw how her life had impacted 30 degrees out, not 30 total people, 30 degrees out. And she only knew people 1 and 2. So she saw that every choice she made in this life, every interaction she had mattered. And it actually rippled into eternity. So I think for us, and my hope for people coming out of the film, is that you can understand that this life does matter. And especially matters because there is a life after this life. And our choices here make a difference in that life, actually. So that would be my hope, is that this film can meet people in their grief and their loss, give them a sense of confidence that a grand reunion is coming.
A number of years ago, I had a life-threatening illness. Fortunately, I made it through it with, good medicine, good doctors, and a lot of prayer. But it certainly made me reflect more on my daily life, also to have greater compassion for people who suffer. You know, having gone through these pandemics, people are looking for hope and purpose. Is that one of the reasons you have decided to do this movie at this particular time?
Absolutely. We started at the beginning of the pandemic in January of 2020, and the pandemic hit, and we took a small team around the country for the next 2.5 years, filming and cutting it. But on the heels of the pandemic, and in the midst of today, with all that's going on in Israel and Eastern Europe, the earth is groaning, humanity is groaning, and it's a scary place to be on earth right now, it feels like. And I think the collective level of anxiety is heightened. And our hope is that this film can invade the moment and provide just an hour and 40 minutes of reprieve. Um, that there is something greater that we can trust in. There's something bigger at play than we can understand or see.
Yeah, I my background is in philosophy, and I remember coming across a near-death experience by the famous uh, atheist and analytic philosopher named A.J. Ayer in 1988. And again, he would be kind of the Richard Dawkins of the day, but really a brilliant philosopher. He was in the hospital. He loved eating uh, uh, salmon. So one of his friends brought some salmon. He choked on it and had an out of body experience. He had a near death experience where he said later that he encountered a moral being and that the moral being was drawing his attention to his own accountability. Later, he told a Catholic priest that he goes, I don't know if God exists, but I know there's life after death. And I mean, that would be like Richard Dawkins, the leading atheist, saying, wow, I had this extraordinary experience. Tell us again, maybe some of the key takeaways you want people to hear. And then also tell us a little bit. You have a sweater on, Angel Studios. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
So I think the thing that really impressed me while making the film was the volume of NDE stories globally and the uniformity of story. They weren't all the same, but the commonalities across these globally, regardless of tradition, religious tradition, or culture, would all cite sort of this man or being of light or love. And so these descriptions really sort of mirror our Judeo-Christian understanding of God, and it was reaffirming of my faith in that way, in a beautiful way. So that was encouraging, just to know that people all around the world are having similar experiences as they get into this liminal space between this reality and the next. And God seems to be invading this moment. And so I find that to be beautiful and reaffirming. Angels. So I've been an independent filmmaker for about 15 years, and I've never been more excited about the current state of the marketplace and the opportunity as a filmmaker. And in large part, that's due to the innovation and disruption of Angel Studios. They came onto the scene as sort of the studio behind the Chosen series that has had wild success globally. And they went on and did a film, His Only Son, which is on Abraham, and that had a very large release in theaters for an independent film. Then they took on Sound of Freedom. Sound of Freedom is now a top 10 all-time independent film
Yeah.
globally. And we're the next up after Death is on October 27th, Friday. So one of the ways they innovate is the executive team there does not make decisions on content, which is a far cry from the industry, Hollywood. I'm actually in the center of it right now, and they have a voting body called the Guild, and that guild is made up of about 100,000 versions of us around the country that vote on content. A subset of that guild votes on the content. So they take a very iterative approach. They're really a tech company fundamentally, so they're constantly testing everything. And in filmmaking, that's not always the case. It tends to be sometimes more art. But when you can marry the art and science, ironically, you can get better output. And so that's, my film is now coming out on, I think the last number is 2,600 screens, which
Wow.
for perspective is a top 5 all-time documentary for screen count. So you typically don't take docs into theaters. You certainly don't take it out wide. And they're taking it out wide, and they're confident in doing that because the audience has spoken to the guild, and then all the marketing efforts have just reaffirmed that. I think last time I looked, almost 140,000 tickets have been pre-bought, which people don't typically buy movie tickets ahead of showing up. So we're very encouraged that the model seems to be resonating with the consumer and the opportunity to take content out that amplifies light.
Yeah. Very interesting, Jason. I had an older sister back in the mid 70s. So this is before even Raymond Moody or Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had come out writing about this. My sister had scarlet fever, damaged her heart as a child. In her mid 30s, maybe 40s, her heart stopped beating in a doctor's examination. She rose above her body, went through a tunnel, saw a light. And again, she shared all of this with me before any of this material became coming out in popular books. And I was fascinated by the topic. And I know that this is a phenomenon that I think needs to be taken very carefully. And again, I appreciate so much that you want to bring together science and medicine with faith. Jason, last question. Where can people go and find out more about this, both to get tickets, but also more information on your fine film?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Angel.com/lifeafter. People can go and buy tickets, but Angel's also done a cool thing where folks that cannot afford tickets can actually get free tickets through people that buy it through a pay it forward program. So if you are able to buy an extra ticket, Angel makes those extra tickets available to folks that can't afford it. So angel.com/lifeafter will allow folks to go and get free tickets and purchase tickets for someone else.
Well, again, I have been joined today by Jason Pamer. He is the co-founder and executive producer of Cypher Studios and one of the producers of this new film, After Death. Jason, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Real privilege. Thanks again for having me.